Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. I'm in Fargo, beautiful Fargo, North Dakota. It's raining, as you can see. If you've been part of my other live sessions, you'll know that I'm not in Oz anymore. I'm now in Fargo in an office. And of course, I'm ready for my office adventures with my mask and my badge to get in. And so today, I want to welcome you to our session 5. I'm Gerald Finken. I'm CEO of RXE2, and we're about the practice of pharmacy for everyone, everywhere. And by that is what we want to do is incorporate the practice of pharmacy into clinical research. And by doing that, we believe that we can make a real difference. And most importantly, what we want to do is make clinical trials an option for everyone, everywhere, just as another healthcare option. As you go in and say, okay, how do I want to be treated? Do I want to do homeopathic? Do I want to see the surgeon? Do I want medicine? Do I want to do nothing? But more importantly, what I want to say is, or do I want to do digital medicine as just an option? And we'll get into that today. And I'm really excited about where we are today's session, because as always, what I want is the takeaway is to learn. And I'm going to learn a lot today, because even the questions I asked, that I'm going to be asking of our guest, to me are the questions like I have, and I hope you do too. And with that, of course, you can always ask questions. So there's a chat. So I beg everybody, please. And since we're in the decentralized clinical world and virtual, if we can't ask questions, how are we expecting patients to ask questions? And so please use the chat. So with that said, I'll move on and invite and introduce today my special guest, Jennifer Goldsack, who's the Executive Director of DIME, or Digital Medicine Society. Jennifer, I'm very pleased to have you here today.
I'm delighted to be here, Gerald. Thanks so much for having me.
Right. So most of the time, on the things I'd put up, okay, Jennifer is Executive Director, but instead of me doing that, Jennifer, I'm going to push it over to you and say, listen, you tell us what's important about you and your bio. Tell us.
Yeah, happy to. So yes, as you said, Executive Director of the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME. Still a relatively new organization, although I'm sure we'll get into what we do here at DIME shortly. And came to sort of co-founding and having the privilege to lead this extraordinary community of folks dedicated to advancing the field in a perhaps not so traditional pathway. I'm actually a chemist by training, and as you can tell, did not grow up in the US, grew up in London. But
I thought that was a Boston accent. Sorry, I thought that was a Boston accent. Oh, in the UK, okay.
You come from Georgia. So yeah, came to the US. I was actually on the US Olympic team in 2008. So doing absolutely nothing terribly sensible, but had a wonderful experience. And always thought I'd go back to Britain, and ended up staying here in the US. I really enjoyed being here and had the opportunity to do so. And it was quite clear that I was not going to go back to the inorganic lab, and ended up using my research skills in health services research. And it's interesting, having grown up with a very, very different kind of health system, working in health research during the passage of health reform was really fascinating, felt like a great opportunity. And I also feel really lucky, Gerald. A lot of people who retire from being, as I had the privilege to be, an elite athlete, sort of struggle to make that transition. For me, I felt really passionate about the work we were doing. The backdrop of everything that was happening in healthcare was really inspiring. And that's been a thread that's helped me sort of really enjoy the current career I have, as much as the last one that, ostensibly on paper was a little bit more painful, and some people might think was a little more fun, but I find this one to be a bit painful and quite fun too. So very lucky. Anyway, let me make a long story short. So yeah, worked in sort of health services research, went down and co-founded a pragmatic research institute within a community health system, sort of what we would now probably describe as using real world data. Then for my husband's work, we had to relocate down to Florida. And I thought, well, what am I going to do on the west coast of Florida? So I ended up working remotely. I started working for the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, which is a public-private partnership co-founded by the FDA and Duke University, So moved from sort of research on the healthcare side to research on the clinical trial side. And it was there that I was fortunate enough to be tapped to lead for several years an entire program dedicated to exploring, why aren't we using these digital technologies in clinical research when they have permeated almost every other industry and every other facet of our life? And as a result of doing that, I came to the realization, and Gerald, you know me, so I have strong opinions. I try to keep them loosely held, but felt absolutely certain of the promise of these digital technologies to overcome some of the challenges, both in in fact, in three places: public health, in clinical research, and also in healthcare. Challenges that have been sort of pressing and persistent for years, whether that's sort of equity, whether that's access, whether that's affordability and sustainability, whether that's sort of quality and outcomes. However, in order to realize that promise, we need to take a more interdisciplinary approach that I could imagine than in any other field, from sort of citizen scientists and cybersecurity researchers, all the way through to your traditional sort of regulators and payers, every flavor of sort of clinician, and technical expert in between. Everyone needs to be at the table. There's also for all of the potential that we have in this field, there's also new risks of harm that many people, I think, are not fully aware of. So that was the impetus for starting the Digital Medicine Society, really creating this community of experts, regardless of disciplinary background, welcoming everyone, establishing a shared common language, a place to collaborate, a place to intentionally build the field together, and also establishing digital medicine as an evidence-based field. So we do a lot of research, we do a lot of education too. And, Gerald, obviously thrilled to have you as a member, and that's what led us to this conversation today.
Thank you. There are so many terms you rattled off, and I'm sitting there going, and I only know this because of being part of DIME, which I'll ask you to talk about in a second, is that you mentioned a bunch of terms. And in my box, I go down this pathway of this is what I thought they meant. And today what I want to do is, like, I really want everybody to start thinking like you just said, collaborative, everybody together. We need to open that up, because when you talk about outcomes and when you talk about quality and you talk about some of these things, and we'll talk about the playbook later, I'm going to get to that. You're not going to be off the hook. It's like, oh my goodness, that's not what I was thinking. And so anyhow, it leads to all the questions I want to ask. So I have to say is I was thrilled, actually, like you went through your history and stuff. And when I first met you, of course, like everybody, we Google. So I went out to Google and I Googled you and I went, holy, she's a tremendous athlete, best in the world in what you do. And then I think like, oh, now I get where DIME's coming from, so, and then of course, what I really love to see is the background, multifaceted. I know so many great athletes that have a second career. It's like, no, the career did not, multidimensional. And so anyhow, that was just very important to me, and really then just said, okay, I get this. So with that said, let's talk about DIME, because like you said, I know 2019 is when it was found, right? Talk about that. And if you wouldn't mind including, because I want to say your career brought you to a certain point. So talk about the initiation, where it is, how it became about, and then where it is today, where it's going. DIME.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. And I think I alluded to this before. We were in May 2019 when we launched, and I still believe we are today at this critically important juncture in how we define the future of healthcare in the digital era, right? You talk about all these different revolutions, industrial revolution, we're in the digital revolution of healthcare. Yeah. And so if we're at this fork in the road, the real impetus for DIME is, how do we make sure that we develop and use these technologies to do things like develop precision medicine approaches that we've been talking about for years, and it hasn't, and even if very few people have access to them, certainly not everyone does. How do we make sure we do that and not sort of double down on the surveillance economy? How do we use these technologies to ameliorate health disparities, challenges in place, socioeconomic status that have sort of challenged our entire field for years? How do we make sure we improve that, as opposed to make it worse along the digital divide? How do we make sure that we use these technologies and these capabilities to improve efficiency, to sort of reimagine workflows in a way that allow all clinicians to practice at the top of their license, that build care around the patient, not the clinic. How can we make sure we're doing that and not just shoehorning technology into existing broken workflows and frankly making things more inefficient? We're at a really, really important juncture where we need to be intentional. We need to be thoughtful. We need to be collaborative. We need to be evidence-based. And that's what we do at Dime. We do an awful lot of work that goes into what does good look like for the field, to communicating that out to the entire community, and almost thinking about how that is a sort of has become, since we've been around, almost a circular process, which is we hear the pain of the community, we respond to it by creating evidence, we educate on it, we rally the community around it, and then we listen to the next thing. We do all of this aggressively. So our little, and I see you had a question, Gerald, so I'll stop talking in a second. We are committed to this idea of clinical quality work on a tech timeline. One of the greatest frustrations I had before sort of starting Dime was this idea of a false dichotomy between being able to do something well and being able to do something quickly. It's not an either or. We can do a yes and we try and model that at Dime. We work really hard to try and do high quality work with the field as quickly as possible because the field is moving.
Boy, like 3 quick things. You just talk about community. I want to talk about the success of Dime. And of course, as you talk about technologies moving, and I have some theories about that too, of things that I see, again, based on 40 years being in the industry, how to keep up. So first, those 3 things, I won't lose thought of so if you would, the success of Dime. I mean, there are many associations out there, right? But like, I know, share with the audience about where Dime started and where you are right now. In 2 years, right? In 2 years.
Not quite even.
Yeah,
very proud of it. So, I mean, now we have several thousand members from across 43 countries, 6 continents. We are very, very proud of partnerships with organizations like the American Telemedicine Association, with the VA, really working to think about how can we improve the lives of 9 million veterans in the largest healthcare system, and then, sort of disseminate that information more broadly. We work closely, not just in the US, but also with our colleagues at the Health Innovation Hub of the German Federal Ministry of Health. We have an official partnership with them. We're doing an awful lot of work with them. In addition to our research, we have these sort of thriving educational programs. We have absolutely extraordinary engagement from our membership that allows us to do things like make thoughtful public comment. We're certainly not a sort of lobbyist or advocacy group, but there are formal ways in which you can input into sort of legislative and regulatory thinking through the public comment process. We put in, I think, 9 or 10 public comments now. We've done things like produce the playbook. We had a best-selling book, the primer, the sort of the primer on measurement in digital medicine. We really try and think about.
Sorry, I'm.
Oh, there's the playbook. Yeah,
sorry, I'm old school yet on some of this. We're going to talk about that. Yes.
Yeah. Let's definitely talk about that because we've got some new resources coming out actually in just a few days. And I mean, I really think it's come down to our commitment to, as I said, listening to the community so that the community drives what we work on. I have 0 concerns at Dime that we'll ever be unsuccessful in execution. The thing that I try my hardest with is to listen to the community, to watch the field and make sure when we are pointing at something, it is the greatest opportunity or the most pressing challenge that we can uniquely address with our multidisciplinary team to move the needle and approach it in an action-oriented way. So, that I think has been our success. And honestly, Gerald, it's because we have this extraordinary community. It all comes down to the members. It comes down to the participation and the breadth of expertise that we have that frankly, I don't see anywhere else.
Two scopes but when you use the term community. First, give me a quick breakdown of what your community looks like. Membership.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I say this is the most interdisciplinary field I can think of, I have done some research and I stand by that bold comment. But as I said, from your citizen scientists and your patient experts to your cybersecurity researchers to your bioethicists, who are more important now than ever. You think hardware engineers, software engineers, data scientists, biostatisticians. You think of every discipline of practicing sort of clinician, from your physician, nurse, pharmacist, occupational physical therapists, behavioral health experts. Then you need to think about the entire research community, the executive community. You think about the investors, you think about the funders in government, you think about regulators, you think about payers. And we have all of those experts at the table. It was the thing we worked on before we launched, harder than anything, making sure that in leadership roles, you were able to see someone who looked like you. So there are pharmacists at the helm. There are also, if you look at our strategic advisory board, we have the executive director of the biohacking village at DEF CON sitting down alongside members of the EMA, the FDA, NIH, because that's the field. We need to have our cybersecurity researchers. Otherwise, how can we guarantee the security of the products we're asking people to trust? And if you can't trust them, what are we doing here? So that was really, really important to us. And I think that was, with the benefit of hindsight, one of our best decisions early on, to make sure we didn't launch until we had a leadership that reflected how we envisaged the field.
And a personal kudos, something I just saw an announcement the other day. You just hired a Dr. Smit Patel,
Our director of digital medicine.
RD, yeah. So it's like, you go, way to go, Dime. Hire those pharmacists. No, just as you said, your community.
A clinical hire early on. That was really important. We needed to not only make sure we had the expertise in-house in a leadership role, also we needed to signal that to the field. We hit the jackpot in getting Smit because he's terrific. He is a very, very thoughtful sort of pharmacist. He's practiced in sort of rural clinics as well. He's actually implemented some sort of tech redesign.
I Googled them.
So you know all these things. He's done tremendous work. And we talk about digital, the field of digital medicine sitting at the intersection of technology and clinical. Then we have to have a staff as well as a membership that reflects that. So I'm really glad you brought that up. We're very proud of it. We're also just thrilled to have Smith on board. He's fabulous. But yes, we do have a pharmacist.
That actually, with your last comment, just I'll move on. I have many more questions, but like I say, people ask your questions, and whether we get to them in this session, we'll respond. So questions that you provide, if we don't get to them during this session at the end, we will absolutely make sure, Jennifer, I could have your handshake on that we'll follow up with those questions. I'd appreciate it.
We're good. We're working with the community.
Yeah. So moving on to kind of the definition, and this is where when I first heard the term digital medicine, I'm still in a little bit of a quandary, and I say this because I know I don't know what digital is anymore, and after being part of Dime and reading the playbook, so I thought I understood what digital was. I know what medicine is. Right. And as pharmacists, we're the medication experts. We're trained, licensed, just, practice in being medication experts. So now we have this digitalization. And so when I heard digital medicine, I still take a step back. So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot for a healthcare professional, or for me as just a common person. How you defined in layman's terms, like in sixth grade language, right? In sixth grade language, the definition of digital medicine. Sorry to put you on the spot, but.
No, if I can't answer that question, we've got problems, and I can do it in sixth grade language, so don't worry. It's really interesting. I think for us, digital medicine are the whole suite of evidence-based digital tools that support the practice of medicine. So for us, it's a lot less about the digitization of a therapy, although that is part of the digital toolbox. It's much more about, in the digital era, right? Whether that's in commerce or bloody awful social media, or whether it's in healthcare, it's the use of digital products, evidence-based hardware and software tools that measure or intervene in people's health, that support the practice of medicine. And that's why we picked digital medicine. It's not about the digitization of a pill. It's about the digitization of the art and science of medicine.
I want to, hopefully we get time, because now I want to, with that comment, I want to talk about AI. Maybe at the end, we'll maybe move there, because I want to stay down the path here. Where do you see digital medicine? Like where, and I'm also talking about the hype cycle, right? Digital health hype cycle. Actually, I'll talk about that now. Where do you see digital medicine in your terminology? Where is that in the hype cycle of digital health? And do you know what I'm referring to? Someone put that out there about the.
I do. Only because the phrase I love more than anything is the trough of disillusionment. It just cracks me up every time. It's really hard. I think different technology companies, different investors, different healthcare systems, different biopharmaceutical companies, different providers are at different points. The exposure of different organizations to digital, the embrace of digital has been happening at a different pace. And I also think we can't get away from, I'm embarrassed that I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, the absolutely extraordinary amount of money that's being poured into digital health right now. I think it's 14 billion over the last decade if we were to go to the end of 2020. And there's some absolutely bonkers amount that was put in Q1 of 2021. And because I believe in the power of digital to make a change, that is on the one hand very exciting. On the other hand, the thing I remind folks often is that healthcare in the US, 3-point-something trillion, bigger than the GDP of France. If you're going to go and pitch to the French president, here's my one algorithm that's going to change France, no one would believe you. So why should we believe that a single tool, a single product is going to affect the US healthcare market? Then let's go global. It's $12 trillion worldwide. Is your single algorithm, is your single tool going to change the world? No, we have to think about a more concerted, a more unified, a more intentional approach where it's not this patchwork of product by product by product. We may need those products to get us there, but what's the plan? How do we do this? How do we think about the integration of all these different data streams? How do we think about supporting the necessary re-engineering of workflows? How do we think about shoring up vastly different protocols to conduct the research? How do we think about where this data lives? It doesn't have to be transmitted through a fax machine. We were talking about that before we went live, and then put in a manila folder in a file cabinet anymore. It can be accessed by many people at any given time, authorized and unauthorized folks. How are we protecting that information from unauthorized users? How are we making it available to researchers who can develop sort of life-saving new medical products, to people who can write better health policy by targeting resources, to clinicians treating the patient in front of them with the wealth of knowledge about other patients who have come before them, who have looked like them in every way, sort of clinically. That's the, I think, more sweeping change that we need to rally folks around. And increasingly, as more and more people are becoming, I think, open to the fact and confident in the possibility of technology, that's what we're driving at Dime.
So if I want to say to the audience, if you haven't looked at it, that's what the hard copy looks like. I'm not sorry. And it's both, notice I saved paper, it's printed on both sides. And it was not, I printed I didn't use as much ink because yes, I feel badly about printing it, but I can't help it. I like to read. So anybody, if you haven't looked at it, look at it, because a lot of what you just said is in the first few sections of your playbook.
Yep.
Right. And that's where it was a real eye opener to me. And a lot of it, be honest with you, quite a bit was over my head. So it's like one of those books you read and it's like you go back a year later and I said, oh my God, that's what they meant. And so, but now, like you said, with technology, I've got to go back a week later and say, oh, now that's what she meant.
Yeah.
So with this said, I believe it or not, all 400 and some pages, I read it. I mean, I perused it and looked at it, and it was a fascinating job. And so kudos to Dime for publishing this playbook. But with that said, so just to maybe give a taste, there are a couple of key elements that I'd like to talk about that really caught my eye. And so the first one is MTO. Do you know what I'm referring to?
I do.
I love pictures, right? I mean, I'm a visual person, if like you can't tell. But I thought that was so insightful. So talk about MTO versus OTM versus TMO, or not TMI.
We'll save that for another time. Yeah, and I'm really glad that stood out, because honestly, if folks take nothing else away from the work we've done on the playbook, and I want to tell you about some materials coming soon on that too, is the order matters. And so that's what you're getting at with MTO. So MTO would be the importance.
Right. And if I want to stop, let's do this, right? like they said, we must repeat it. I heard it silly advertisement the other day. You have to repeat it. So they said it 3 times. Order matters. Order matters. And that was like, oh yeah. So you have these 3 things, but so anyhow, I have to just repeat that because it's very important. So please.
Yeah. So order matters. And so what is the order that is optimal? It's starting with the measure. So the playbook focuses on a particular subset of digital medicine. It focuses on those products that do digital clinical measurement. And by clinical measurement, we're talking about using sensors to measure sort of physiological or behavioral sort of aspects of health, whether that's biomarkers or whether it's sort of aspects
bionic eyes. Yeah.
Exactly, of how someone sort of feels and functions. And so when we think about this idea of all these measurement tools, and Gerald, I can see that you've got a smartwatch on there. I've got one. I don't happen to be wearing. Oh, you've got 2. I don't happen to be wearing it today. You know, there are all these different sorts of things. There's the, there's a variety of different sensors in our smartphones. They're sort of everywhere right now. You can think about interstitial sensors in a continuous glucose monitor. You know, how do we get this right? How do we get this sort of opportunity to completely redefine how we define health and how we define sort of a medical condition? How do we get it right? It's starting with what's important to the patient. It's starting with what's clinically relevant. It's starting with the information that the treating provider needs or that the researcher needs in order to make a decision. It's not starting with, I was at a trade show and got a really good deal on 250 Apple Watches. And it's certainly not, well, we've got these technologies that were returned from another trial. They're already at the sites. Let's just whack them in the next study. You know, that would be ops first. You know, buying the shiny gadget at a trade show is the tech first. We really need to think about, what are we trying to measure? What is interesting about the patient's lived experience of their condition and what they're experiencing? And then how do we actually extract from that? Because now with technology, there's myriad ways to do it. Think of something even as what sounds simple as sleep. Well, what aspect of sleep are you most interested in, right? You interested in sort of quality? Are you interested in duration? And even once you've made that decision, there's many, many ways to measure each of those. What are you trying to measure and why? And sometimes that means you won't use a digital measure. Sometimes that means you will use an entirely different tool or a different approach. But if you decide at that point that you want to measure something digitally, then you select the appropriate technology. And you have to think about not only the measurement performance of that technology, but things like the security, how the data is used. You have to think about, is it usable to the patients you're asking to wear it? Is the data available to the clinicians and the researchers trying to interpret the information? Can we afford it? And then you get to the operations piece. And that's not to dismiss the operations piece. That's hard, very solvable. We outline it in the playbook, but that's the order we have to go at to make sure that we are measuring things that matter. And we aren't just adding layers of inefficiency to an already really overburdened industry.
So for the audience, what does M stand for?
Measure.
T?
Technology.
And O?
Operations.
Real simple.
Order matters.
Yeah, order matters. MTO. That was a key takeaway for me. If I could, there was one other thing that really hit home, again, as I think about what I thought I knew. And like people that use the term AI, like I'm not using that anymore because it really, in where we're going, there are differences. It isn't just an all-encompassing. So one of the key takeaways, if you would, talk about the term device, right? Because you specifically call that out, right? Yeah.
I'm really glad you said that. And I think that's important as, people say, okay, so you define digital medicine, like what's a digital medicine product? I'm like, oh, okay. There's products and then there's their function. And it's always about how something is deployed in a given context of use in a given patient population and what evidence you have there. So the reason that we try and avoid using the term device at Dime, and we recommend this for folks in the field, is not all high quality evidence-based products are medical devices. Medical devices are a particular term of art by our regulatory colleagues. There's a particular regulatory pathway that you go down. And when you do go down that medical device pathway, you are cleared as a medical device as a consequence of proving the performance against an intended use. If you use it for another intended use, that medical device moniker doesn't actually mean anything. So, it can be a bit of a false flag too. also we can think about how powerful tools like even a smartwatch, which is a commercial product, can be if you take that data, if you confirm using research that that is high quality data, and if you then apply algorithms in order to turn that sort of sensor data into clinically interpretable data, it is more than possible to develop a high quality sort of a digital product and have evidence-based data, even if you, where appropriate, don't choose to use a device, because we can use our smartphones in very powerful ways, because you can use something like a smart speaker that, in very powerful ways, because you can use smartwatches, because you could use a bathroom scale that happens to be connected, or a sleep mat. All of these things offer tremendous insights. And we need to make sure that we aren't sort of systematically excluding some of the promise of the field by using sort of throwaway terms. So we try and avoid sort of technology and think about things like digital sensing product, for example.
And one of the things, again, in my 40 years, it's always been about communication and terminology matters. How many times have, we said something, well, even in life, what we thought we said wasn't what was heard. And so when I got to that section, I was thinking to myself, oh yeah, when instead of saying device, let's get specific about what we're talking about. So that was a key takeaway. I had some other questions about that, but if it just for the sake of time, I'd like to move on, because I want to get to the more important section that I like, to me as a pharmacist, and all the pharmacists who are listening now. Again, please ask your questions, everyone. So I hope I've given everybody, the audience, both, I know you have, right? Of digital medicine, DIME, what we're talking about. And now I want to move to something very important to me. So when I said about the pharmacist being the medication expert, to me, when I think about the medication expert, it isn't that I might know the development, right? The formulation scientist that made the pill, right? And packaged it and gave it to me. It's how it's used. So our medication expertise is to know how the interaction of this drug to another drug. And so when I think about this, it's like, what is the interaction between this device and this device? So, and selfishly or incorrectly, and this is where I want your opinion on this, as a pharmacist, I'm thinking to myself, this is a key role for the pharmacist, because my opinion about it is those devices are going to end up on our shelves. And so then we have to know about them. That's by telling me that we're running out of time. Anyhow,
so
I'd like to keep it short.
Because it's an important...
No, we're doing okay. What I wanted to just point out with that is to take it further and get your advice. What do you see? So I think we have a critical role as pharmacists. What do you see, again, beyond just pharmacy, healthcare professionals? What are your thoughts on that? And can I caveat that? Because what I think about is healthcare professional versus a data technician, or a device technician, or like another person who actually is the expert. And so like, it's like, anyhow, so I'm just, this is like critical to me. If you think about, if I'm as a pharmacist, how would you suggest we position the profession as, boy, that's a big one.
So let me start. It was interesting. So as we talked about, I grew up in the UK, and pharmacists have a really different role in the UK. Much more sort of at the forefront of sort of care. Much, and recognized, I think, a little bit better for their role sort of in the community. And it's interesting because in the US, pharmacists are the second most well-trained, qualified healthcare professional in the country. Use your physician, and then you have your pharmacist. And in my opinion, they are vastly underused. So a couple of sort of responses to your question. I think we have to do a better job of capitalizing on that expertise. I think it is an absolute falsehood that the digitization of healthcare is going to remove clinicians from the process. What it should do is allow them to practice at the top of their license. And what have pharmacists in the US struggled with for a long time now? Practicing at the top of the license. So I actually think this is a really exciting and important time for pharmacists. And you're right, how it's much easier to access a expertly trained pharmacist in your local pharmacy, especially in rural areas, than it is oftentimes other kinds of sort of care professionals. So if you are looking at data from a technology that is giving you pause, if you're struggling with that, if you need information based on the fact that everyone in a future state may well be better informed about their current health state, what's the easiest point of access? It's the pharmacist. And I think we're still thinking about the implications of that and where the field of pharmacy should move. But what I will say is I see a critically important role for pharmacists and the relationship that pharmacists have with their communities as we increasingly sort of digitize healthcare.
Thank you. Because that goes along with some of the thinking so I step back and I say, well, wait a minute, technology has been around a while. And again, I use that term, right? But I think as a pharmacist, when I started practicing, because I did practice in a store while working at Bristol Myers Squibb, for the first 12 years of my life. And I remember the facts in comparison was like this thick, and there was, I don't know, 450 drugs or something like that. Today, the PharmD coming out 6 years, right? I was a 5-year. The book's this thick, right? And there's 3 times as many drugs. So one of the things that happened during that time is I remember the databases, right, would come up with the adverse events. So for me, when I would bring up like a medication like tetracycline if they're on an iron product, and it would tell me these are all like there's an adverse event here or there's drug interactions. But as a pharmacist, I would go, nope, yep, nope. I better talk to the patient about this. Now, remember, stay out of the sun, tetracycline type. And I haven't dispensed in a while, so I go back into ROM and pull that stuff up into RAM. But anyhow, so I look at like those databases, right? This is technology. This is information available to us, as you just said. I love the term you used, practice at the top of our game. And so I think in the past we've already done this. And then what you just said, like I think about AI and the like real AI about replacement. And that's where like we think about like, well, AI replace, and there's sessions, CE credits and articles about like, are we going to be replaced? And I keep thinking about, the idea of like manufacturing, right? The last 40 years, the gross national products have been measured by service and technology, not by making shoes. Yeah. Right? Not by manufacturing, even though the manufacturing is critical in so many places. I'm in Fargo, North Dakota. We manufacture farm equipment up here, even though we've got an extremely big tech capability up here. So when I think about it, it's like this is just a natural progression. And as pharmacists, move us out of the buy-sell to all service provided. So I look at this and saying there are opportunities there. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree.
For the AI, again, talking about like digital medicine, does that, do you foresee this if you put on your, the Kreshkin hat, now I'm dating myself,
I mean, to me, the biggest implication of the digitization of healthcare is that we're going to run on a data economy, right? We can talk about.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. On a
data economy. We can talk about all the different front-end products that might be, nodes for capturing data. We can think about those sort of layers, analytics layers, and sort of portals that allow access back to clinicians, and very importantly, each individual sort of person, not just patients, but people before we're patients. Underlyingly, the power is going to come from the data that underlies all of this. The sort of data and digital exhaust of just living these days is extraordinary. So, there is absolutely no way. And in fact, in my opinion, the reason that sort of digital medicine is coming of age right now is because a couple of things came together. It's the sort of miniaturization of the sensors, but it's also our computing power. It's our ability to take these absolutely enormous data sets and interpret them. And in order to do that, we'll have to be using, a variety of different AI methodologies, from machine learning to other different sort of fit for purpose kinds of technology that is now, outside of the purview of an individual human, though it always requires human oversight. It requires development by humans. It requires oversight by humans. Our data science colleagues are critically important and will be increasingly so. But I always think about it as there are these sort of nodes of connection between sort of the human and sort of the individual people, between the sort of the clinicians. But underlyingly, if we do this right, we are simply going to be running on volumes of data and information that improve our ability to do decision making, to care for people, to develop new therapies, to target, resources. That's what the future state looks like. To me, it all comes down to data.
Fascinating. Excellent. I always have to joke about it. Like you said, like to the person, it's like, well, when the 286 chip produced it, it was already past me. So, the computer replaced me.
This is why collaboration is really important. We can't have, the expectation is we can't expect our, clinical colleagues to have a PhD in computer science, and nor can we expect our computer science colleagues, to go out and earn, to become RNs, right? That's absurd. But what we need to do is we need to find a common language so we can communicate. We need to build trust, and we need to have that common North Star. And that's what I think it all comes down to.
Super. I'd like to start bringing this to a close. And there are so many other questions I'd like to ask. And I want to say to the audience before I ask one last question, and then you can go on as long as you want, Jennifer, but because I could listen all day, is to remind everybody again to ask your questions one last, and we'll get to those in just a minute. Or better yet, maybe we'll just respond in kind when because of time right now that I've gone on rather long. To remind everybody to get in touch with Jennifer. Again, you can Google her. You can go to the Dime. She has her LinkedIn, about the playbook, about Dime, and about Jennifer herself, and this information we've discussed today. Again, easily accessible. And the same thing for myself. You can go through my LinkedIn or RxE2 if you have questions and want to follow this further. So I'll leave it the last question or just comment. We from a 10,000 or 37,000 feet, cruising altitude, we distilled quite a bit in 40 minutes. Any last thing you would like to tell people about, or, I know you mentioned about the playbook, you have the update coming. Is there, please mention that briefly. And then also if there's anything that like a topic that's near and dear to you that I might've missed today.
So yes, the playbook, which you showed everyone, the weighty tome, we are on, so coming up fast, April 30th, we are doing a public launch of over 150 new resources. So rather than having to wade through this 400 slide deck, we've created, I think, over 50 micro decks, specific that address particular questions that have been most common. We've done things like create checklists, value-based matrices. We have an entire 7-module curriculum that now delivers in multiple different ways, sort of content from the playbook. So that is going to be available as of April 30th. And if folks want to join us and colleagues from FDA and EMA for launch, please go to playbook.dimesociety.org and you can register. It's a public event, so anyone can join us. And then let's go back to, I think, some of the most important pieces of this. Gerald, we opened by talking about the promise of digital and how important this juncture is in the advancement of the field. We really are at that fork in the road. Are we going to use all of these tools and technologies to improve lives, or aren't we? And, that's our mission at Dime. We are a thriving community. And, for folks who may not be engaged but are passionate about making sure we take the right fork in the road and that we do end up in a place that's better for all individuals, for practicing clinicians, for society, join us. It's a wonderful, wonderful community. There's an opportunity to really be part of sort of intentionally building the field and finding terrific collaborators.
You got my promise. I want to do more than talk. I want to do, because I couldn't agree more. We're at a critical juncture of changing, right? Technology has been around for a long time in clinical research specifically, and strategically, what has it done? And we can't do this anymore. We've got to get out of that hype cycle. We've got to get into, in essence, I believe right now we're at a point where we can change the curve of that hype cycle.
Absolutely.
Make it different. So with that said, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me today. You're just so much information, just a plethora of information, and dynamic, and I just love it. And I really commend you on just a tremendous job in such 2 short years of what you've done with Dime. And I've been to several sessions, and I'm just amazed by the people who are attending, the comments of discussion. So I invite everybody to join Dime. Follow RxE2, don't get me wrong. But this session was really about digital medicine and all of us learning. So with that said, I'd like everybody to join me again in another month. I'm going to have session 6. And I'm working on it. And I think everybody who in healthcare understands. My next session is going to actually have people. I want clinically trial naive patients, inclusion, exclusion, on a discussion. And so I'm looking to have several patients, maybe an advocacy, but I really want like just common people on a discussion about clinical trials, because I think we've got to start thinking about the masses, the 95% that don't participate. And I know we're looking at it, so I'm going to discuss it. Let's talk to people about clinical trials. And maybe I'll go on the road. Can I talk to you about clinical trials? But anyhow, that's what we're going to look at in May, and I can't promise yet because, of course, HIPAA and things like that we're going through, and I think everybody understands. So please join me in May. Like I said, please go out and see the playbook, Dime, check into RxE2. And as a healthcare professional, I hope everybody gets vaccinated. I've got my first vaccine last Saturday, and I'm looking forward to 2 weeks from now when I get my second vaccine, and 2 weeks after that, so I can go hug my grandchildren, after a year. And so please, everybody get vaccinated. Healthcare professional, pharmacists saying, beseeching you to do that. And with that, I want to say, Jennifer, thanks again. Everybody who joined us and stayed for the full time, I realize it went long. Thank you so much for joining us, and join us again next month. All right. Thank you. Good day.
Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep.